Welcome, everyone. Happy Monday. Feel free to introduce yourselves and where you're calling in from in the chat. We'll give it about 2 minutes for people to come in from the waiting room. Welcome, everyone. Feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat as you're coming in. I see Jan from Pennsylvania, Lisa from Michigan, Kayla from Nevada, Jay from Alabama. Okay, and now they're coming in too fast for me to keep up with. Oh, there they go. Welcome, everyone. Still see a steady flow of people coming in from the waiting room, so I'll give it about another 30 seconds before we get started. Feel free to keep on introducing yourselves in the chat as you come in. All right, I think the flow of people coming in from the waiting room is slowing down a bit. So I'm going to go ahead and kick us off. We have a pretty packed agenda for the day. I'm Courtney Cooperman. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the project manager of NLIHC's Our Homes, Our Votes campaign. Thank you so much for joining us for the second webinar in our series, Laying the Groundwork for Your Campaign. And again, feel free to keep introducing yourselves in the chat. It might be really hard to believe, but we're pretty much exactly 6 months away from the November elections. And now it's the time to hit the ground running with nonpartisan voter engagement activities. Today's webinar is intended to present you with some essential considerations and organizing tools to help you get started. First, I'll give a bit of an overview of the fundamentals of staying nonpartisan, do's and don'ts for HUD-funded agencies, and where to look for more information about legally permissible activities. Then we'll welcome Morgan Murray, Voter Engagement Programs Manager at the League of Women Voters, to talk about the components of a successful voter engagement campaign. Then we'll have Eddie Zerby, Deputy Director of Students Learn, Students Vote, to introduce the nonpartisan civic holidays as an organizing tool for election season. And then as time permits, I'll provide some reminders about ways to get involved with Our Homes, Our Votes beyond this webinar series and a preview of our upcoming webinars. I'm seeing a few comments that the closed captioning isn't working. I know we may still be waiting for our captioner, but we can try to get the auto captions going in the meantime, if that's all right. Yeah, if someone on the back end is able to look into that and get those up and running, that would be great. Thank you for your patience, everyone, as we're working on that. So just a few quick housekeeping items before we get started. You may have received an email from Zoom that said there was an update on the series with some new dates. That was a kind of a fluke on Zoom's part. We're not exactly sure why that happened, but the dates have not changed. You will get an update after this webinar with a reset from Zoom with the correct dates. So disregard that message, and you can still find the correct dates listed on the Our Homes, Our Votes website. Second, this webinar is being recorded. We'll send out the recording, the slides, and the links in our Friday email newsletter. The connection and the recording will be posted on the NLIHC YouTube channel by the end of the week. Closed captioning, we are working on getting that up and running if we haven't done so Throughout the webinar, please use the Q&A feature to ask questions. With so many people attending, it can be a bit hard to sort through them in the chat. So if you ask in the Q&A, there's a greater chance that we will see and get to your question. And last but not least, Our Homes, Our Votes is 100% nonpartisan, meaning that we don't endorse or favor specific candidates or political parties. Our goal is to build the voting power of low-income renters so we can hold all elected officials accountable to prioritize housing justice. And that is a perfect segue to my next slide, which is key considerations for staying nonpartisan. As a bit of background, 501c3 is the technical term for tax-exempt public charities. So NLIHC is a 501c3 nonprofit. And we can go on to the next slide. So 501c3s cannot engage in any partisan political activities, meaning they cannot endorse or oppose candidates, they can't align with a political party, or otherwise attempt to influence the outcome of an election. Doing any of these partisan activities will jeopardize a 501c3 nonprofit's tax-exempt status. But what 501c3s can and should do is nonpartisan voter and candidate engagement. This includes registering, educating, and getting voters out to the polls. 501c3s can reach out to candidates to educate them about the organization's priorities, as long as they are reaching out and offering information to all candidates. They can sponsor a candidate forum or town hall, as long as all candidates are invited and given equal opportunity to speak. You're probably starting to notice a bit of a trend here. And they can distribute candidate questionnaires as long as all candidates have equal opportunity to participate. 501c3s can also endorse and campaign for ballot measures, which is considered a form of lobbying and must be counted towards the organization's 501c3 lobbying limits. What nonpartisan organizations cannot do is conduct any of these activities in a way that is intended to benefit a particular candidate or party. So you can register voters, but you cannot choose which voters to register based on who they are likely to vote for, or only offer rides to the polls to voters that support a certain party, or anything kind of along those lines. 501c3s also can't endorse political candidates or make donations to them. They can't use staff time or resources or the organization's image to promote a candidate or party. If you're a staff member at a nonprofit, you can do partisan activities on your own time, but you can't represent yourself as kind of acting in the capacity of an employee at that nonprofit. We can go to the next slide. The Boulder Advocacy Campaign of the Alliance for Justice has really deep expertise in the rules of the road for nonpartisan advocacy and election work. So I highly, highly recommend checking out their resources for really a deeper dive into all of these provisions. We'll drop a few of those links in the chat, including state-specific guides to nonprofit voter assistance, a toolkit for what nonprofits can do with respect to ballot measures, and much more in their online resource library. So we'll get that all in the chat for you. Thanks so much to my colleague Lindsay for sharing those in the chat. We can go to the next slide. So there are a few important exceptions with regards to some federally funded programs and nonpartisan voter engagement activities. There are specific restrictions on Legal Services Corporation, AmeriCorps, Community Services Block Grant, and Head Start funded organizations. But before I get into the specifics of these, I just want to emphasize that these are the exceptions and not the rule. Most federal programs, nonpartisan voter engagement is not only permitted, but actively encouraged. But these are a few important exceptions to note. Staff at Legal Services Corporation organizations are the most restricted. They can't engage in any nonpartisan election work. AmeriCorps Vistas and other programs funded by the Corporation for National and Community Service can't do voter registration in their capacity as employees, but their programs can make voter registration forms and information available on the premises. They can conduct other more general nonpartisan voter education activities, And vistas can do political activities in their personal time as long as they're not representing their organization in any way. Community Services Block Grant Funds, or CSBG, cannot be used for nonpartisan voter registration or rides to the polls, but CSBG funded agencies can use other funds for these purposes and can use CSBG funds to provide nonpartisan information about elections. Note that this applies to CSBG, not CDBG. CDBG grantees don't face any special restrictions on nonpartisan voter engagement. Similarly, Head Start funds can't be used for nonpartisan voter registration or rides to the polls, but they can have external nonpartisan organizations on site to register voters. They can also do other types of nonpartisan voter education, like keeping parents informed about how and where to vote. So we'll drop a link where you can read more about the specifics of these restrictions. But again, the key takeaway here is that these programs with restrictions are an exception, they are not the rule. In general, federally funded programs can and are actively encouraged to register and educate and mobilize voters in nonpartisan ways. And we can go to the next slide. You'll see that this is the case for HUD-funded agencies. In 2021, President Biden issued an executive order on promoting access to voting that encourages federal agencies, including HUD, to take affirmative steps to promote access to voting. In response to this directive from the president, HUD issued announcements in 2022 to public housing directors and owners of HUD multifamily buildings, clarifying that they're not only permitted, but they are actively encouraged to do nonpartisan voter engagement work. And we can go to the next slide. So these announcements make really clear that HUD-subsidized providers can share nonpartisan voter and election resources with residents. They can permit the use of community space to hold nonpartisan meetings, candidate forums, and voter registration events. They can collaborate with local election administrators to use space for ballot drop boxes and polling place locations. And the announcement for PHA directors also specifies that they can provide documentation of residence, they can apply to the state to operate as a voter registration agency, and they can make voter registration forms available, accept and transmit completed forms, and run PHA-initiated voter registration drives as permitted by state law. We can go to the next slide. There's also some activities that HUD clearly prohibits, and this really mirrors what we talked about earlier with partisan activities that 501c3s can't do. HUD-subsidized owners and PHAs can't do anything partisan. So again, that means they can't favor one candidate or another in any way. This would mean like something like inviting one candidate to an event without providing the equal opportunity for another to attend, advertising the importance of voter registration or voting for the sake of benefiting one party or candidate, or using facilities for partisan activities, like phone banking for a candidate rather than making phone calls for nonpartisan election reminders, which would be allowed. HUD-funded agencies also can't give the impression that benefits are tied to a resident's voting activity or otherwise indicate that registration and voting are not voluntary. All of these steps are really intended to facilitate access to voting and help residents overcome obstacles, not to coerce anyone into voting or to tie any benefits to voting. So for example, a HUD-funded agency cannot host an election night party and only invite or offer rewards to those who voted. All residents would need to be invited. So you can find HUD's announcements and a summary of the do's and don'ts for HUD-funded agencies that we put together on our website. We just dropped that link in the chat. We can go to the next slide for just a quick little snapshot of that so you can see what that resource on our website looks like. I see we have a few questions that have come in. I'm going to hold off on answering questions about nonpartisanship because our other panelists have a lot of expertise in this area as well. So we'll take questions at the end following all of their presentations. But please continue to ask your questions in the Q&A box. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Morgan.
Thank you, Courtney. Thank you for having me, everyone. Welcome. My name is Morgan Murray. I'm the Voter Engagement Program Manager with the League of Women Voters National Office. And I'll be talking to you a little bit today about, how to, I know you all have already heard, just why nonprofits are essential in getting communities out to vote. You all are the perfect messengers. So just wanted to talk about, how you can begin planning your activities, what you might want to consider as you are thinking about your activities and how you can do some deeper engagement. So going beyond just the registration and reminders to vote. And if you could go to the next slide, that is myself. I think you see me. And then, sorry, next slide. All right, I just wanted to do a quick poll with you all. So maybe we could use the hand raise function. So just want to get an idea of kind of the experience level in the room. So if you want to raise your hand, if you've already registered voters in your community, or maybe have done so in the past. And the raise hand function should just be down below, should be easily accessible. And let's see if I can see. Okay. Starting to see some more. About 37. We're hovering around 37, 38. Okay, we've got some more experience. All right, so it looks like 40 people have experience registering voters. Okay, if you want to lower your hand. And then if I could see how many of you have contacted voters before an election to encourage them to vote or even to make a plan to vote. All right. Seeing about the same. Okay, wonderful. So we've got a good amount of experience in the building. So hoping that my presentation is helpful for those who may not be familiar. All right, and then if I could have everyone lower their hands now. Perfect. All right. So I will just give a quick introduction of the League of Women Voters. So we are a 104-year-old organization this year, and we empower voters and defend democracy. If you could go to the next slide, please. A little bit about the history of the League of Women Voters. We were founded by suffragists in 1920 after the ratification of the 19th Amendment to really help newly enfranchised women to exercise their right as voters. If you could go to the next slide. So a little bit about us today. So we are and have always been a nonpartisan grassroots nonprofit dedicated to empowering everyone to fully participate in American democracy. So we do not support or oppose any political party or candidate, but we do, as an organization, we're dedicated to both voter education and advocacy. So the League takes strong stances on political issues related to voting rights, civil rights, and other issues of importance to members of the public. If you could go to the next slide. And just a little bit more about our organization. We do have active affiliates in all 50 states plus DC and more than 700 communities. And we engage in advocacy, education, litigation, and organizing to protect Americans' freedom to vote. And next slide, please. So we are the largest volunteer-driven on-the-ground registering of voters with tens and thousands of members leading the charge. And the next slide, please. And some of our core programs, of course, are voter registration. And so we focus on registering young voters, newly naturalized citizens, and more recently, those that have either formerly been or are currently incarcerated. So our primary goal is to support historically marginalized voters and really close that participation gap. So we'd love to connect with more groups, especially those of you that are within the low-income housing community, and work with people experiencing housing insecurity. So you'll also see the League registering voters at community events, at transit hubs, on college campuses, university campuses, and all across the country. So we definitely encourage you to reach out to the League in your community if you'd like to partner up with them. And then we also register voters through our digital resource, vote411.org, which we'll discuss next. And so vote411.org was launched by the League of Women Voters Education Fund. Vote411.org is a one-stop shop where voters can find the election information that they need to navigate the election process and make their voices heard. So Vote 411 is virtual, nonpartisan, and available in English and Spanish. So voters can check their registration data, check their registration status, deadlines, election dates. They can find their polling place, make a voting plan, find out what's on their ballot, from candidates to also ballot measures. Also can compare candidates in various federal, state, and local races, and review voter guides and watch candidate debate videos. So vote411.org really also serves as a means of combating mis and disinformation by being a trusted resource of nonpartisan voting information. And if you could, thank you. And so we offer the invitation to partner with us. We offer co-branded white label pages to help your communities get the information that they need. So just get in contact with us if that is of interest to you. And next slide. So in addition to registering voters and providing election information, we also make millions of GOTV contacts, so get out the vote, with voters through postcards, phone banks, text banks, and canvases, especially encouraging turnout in areas where many people refer to as low propensity, but we like to refer to as high opportunity areas. Next slide. All right, so now that you've heard a little bit about our organization and what we do, it's time to discuss how your organization can do the same. And also, if you want to kind of deepen your engagement. So you can utilize these tips to plan an effective and well-organized voter registration drive in your community, and also help guide with your other activities. So, effective voter registration and voter engagement programs really require dedicated planning and volunteer and staff time. So before you're starting your activities, these are just some things to keep in mind. So thinking about what time frame you have, how many people you want to target, how many events you aim to host, how many people you want to register. You'll also want to think about how you can really get the most bang for your time and efforts. So what locations or venues may help you reach the most either unregistered, first-time voters, and really those high potential voters, those voters who may vote infrequently, may vote, some voters may vote in the presidential election, but maybe not in primaries or state or local elections. So thinking about those voters as well. I know you all are probably at sites where you're reaching your intended audience, but even thinking about other areas that may help you reach the people that you are trying to reach with voter information. So maybe at transit hubs, community and sporting events, thinking about National Voter Registration Day events, or even hosting your own, which I know my colleague will be talking about in just a second. And then you all are really, the trusted messengers in your community. So also in your planning, you'll want to think about how to identify any potential partners that may be essential in helping you reach your target audience, or providing more capacity to help you reach your goals. And then as you're thinking about partners, thinking about how the work can be mutually beneficial. So identifying also team members that will be leading and participating in your ventures, and then attending any required training. So this is especially for registering voters. Some states may be requiring training with the Board of Elections. I know, for example, in Virginia, if you're requesting more than 25 voter registration applications, you'll need to complete a certified training with the VA Department of Elections. So thinking about what sort of training you may need to actually do your venture. And then thinking about any online ways of registering voters, whether that be through your state's Board of Elections website, or a website like vote411.org. And then in addition to the training, you'll want to think about also some other factors when you're planning ahead. So you'll want to make sure your entire volunteer force is kind of familiar with the federal, state, and local laws that govern voter registration in your community. So voter registration practice differ from place to place. So you can check out, either contact your local elections officials, or check out the Fair Elections Legal Network state-specific voter resource, and I'll put that in the chat there in a little bit. You could also consider reaching out to your local LWV chapter or other civic organizations that can help with this. And so when you're thinking about that, finding out if there's a protocol for handling completed voter registration forms. Is there a certain time frame from completion to turning them into the elections office that you need to abide by? Are there any additional factors that you may need to consider if you're handling voter registration forms? You'll also want to check to see what data is legally allowable to collect from the completed voter registration forms, if any. For some states, there may not be any information that you're able to collect from there. You may be able to use this information as follow-up. Again, we'll talk about this a little later. And then also making sure you have a mechanism to track the contact information from from the people that you're registering to follow up and remind them to vote. And if you could go to the next slide. And so as you're, thinking about your programs, you'll also want to consider reaching out to your local elections officials office. And these are some kind of tips to help guide you as you are thinking about coordination. So letting your local elections officials know your plans. This may help flag anything of concern, may also be a resource for them to provide, any support. You'll also want to attend any training so that your team is equipped that they might be hosting, asking about any new changes in either voter registration or voting, and what that means for the people that you may be registering, and also educating, and then also seeing if they have any suggestions. So you'll want to consider the populations that you're working with. So maybe you may need more information about registering people that may be unhoused, experiencing homelessness. You may also think about people that are having their name changed. I know a lot of our organizations work with newly naturalized voters. So, once they become citizens and if they are changing their name, there may be some protocols with that. So thinking about that there. And then you may want to ask for any materials, such as voter registration applications and voter information that you may be able to hand out at your events. So again, be sure to turn in any completed voter registration forms promptly, and then be sure to flag any problem application. So maybe someone forgot to include their social or some other required information, and then be sure to offer, if you can, to troubleshoot those and maybe contact them to follow up. And if you want to go to the next slide. And so, once you kind of have your plan down, you'll want to really start thinking about when and how you'll want to train your team. So again, making sure that the voter registration drives are nonpartisan and focusing on helping people register to vote and educating them on how to cast their ballot. So some things that you may want to include in your training are walking through the registration form or the online system. You maybe want to identify any online registration requirements, especially if a voter ID is needed. And so that may be, so if, your state has, voter ID is needed for online registration requirements, making sure that you have ample amount of paper voter registration forms for people that may not be able to register, or if they need to, make a photocopy of their ID, thinking through those things in the process. So really kind of troubleshooting any obstacles that may exist for certain voters. You'll also want to understand the eligibility requirements and how to handle those. Some folks may not be eligible, for example, non-citizens or people that may have felony convictions. So thinking about, how you will be handling those people that may not be eligible to register to vote. And then developing and practicing how you'll engage people that you'll want to register. So be warm and positive. Think about, what would get you to the table. Be sure to think about what is important to your audience. Obviously a lot of the people that may be interested in, affordable housing. So how state and local policies affect that. Maybe you have a lot of parents in your communities and they're concerned about education, how school board candidates, affect that, and, electing people that have values that align with theirs. So just thinking through the people that you're interacting with and kind of what's at the top of their mind in regards to the issues that they care about. And then thinking about any questions that you may receive and have resources on hand for follow-up. So of course, our website, vote411.org, maybe your local elections website for how people can find their polling place, how people can learn about the candidates, how people can cast their absentee or vote by mail ballot. So just thinking about those things as well. And then on the next slide, we'll just think through some of the things that you may want to bring to your events. So you may want to have some voter registration forms and applications, of course, but also, and I'm sorry, I'm having a little trouble seeing here. Just 1 second. No, I'm sorry, could you go back to the next slide? Thank you. And then also any collection envelope that you may want to use to have your completed registration forms, any pens and pencils, any things for people to write with, name tags, signage, any state and county election dates and registration rules, information on absentee, vote by mail, early voting dates, voter ID requirements, and other things that voters may need to know. If you have any voters guides or if voters guides are available in your area, thinking about those and any candidate debate or form information. And as well as a data collection tool. So either a form or a spreadsheet that you may be using to collect contact information to follow up with those people that you've registered. And if you could go to the next slide. Thank you. And so this is just kind of a sample work plan that you may be able to use for your activity. So thinking about, how far out you want to start planning. And then as you get closer to the event, training, assigning duties, and then evaluating for future planning. And if you could go to the next slide. And so after your events, you'll want to make sure to turn in voter registration forms promptly if you're doing voter registration drives, if you're doing other activities, just either education events, any forums, etc. You'll just want to make sure that you thank your venue, your partners, your volunteers, and then really focus on following up with the people that you have either registered or educated. And now we'll discuss GOTV. So Get Out the Vote, or GOTV, is really getting those that support you to cast their ballot. So before, a lot of the focus was on getting votes out to the polls on election day, but now we have so many options and we have to incorporate early voting, absentee, and vote by mail in our strategies. So if you want to go to the next slide, thank you. So as you're thinking about how you'll, follow up with those that you've registered, you'll want to be sure to keep track of their names and addresses, emails, and telephone numbers. You'll also want to create a spreadsheet or photocopy registration forms. Of course, this is where it's legally allowed and only the information that is permissible by law. So this information is really key to following up with voters to provide helpful information about voting. It really also helps keep your records accurate about your voter registration drive. So as much as you're able to collect that contact information, it is great. So help those that you've registered get out to vote by either directing them to their polling place or local drop box, letting them know how absentee and mail deadlines and other critical election information. You'll also want to let them know about any candidate debates or forums in your areas and what positions and issues will be on their ballot. So keep in mind that if you are collecting information from voter registration applications, voters can only be contacted about election information unless they've expressly signed up to receive other kinds of information. So if you have any fundraising or event alerts, those things you are not allowed to contact voters about unless they have expressly given you permission. So if you are wanting to contact those that you've registered about other things that are not related to the election, you'll want to maybe consider using maybe pledge forms or a sign-in sheet to kind of allow them to opt into communications from you. And then you'll want to make sure that you time your outreach to voters around key dates. So any voter registration deadlines, any mail-in requests or return deadlines, early voting dates, and of course, election day. So make sure you're positive, but brief and helpful. And then you'll also want to consider the methods that you're going to use. So you can either do phone calls or phone banks, mail, so postcard reminders, or digital, which are emails and texting, which are typically less effective unless you are using warm contacts, which a lot of you probably will be if you are doing voter registry or if you're contacting the voters that you're registered. Now, outside of the voters that you're registered, of course, get out the vote activities are great. You may want to consider either hosting or partnering with another organization to contact voters through voter lists. So you can also think about that as you are doing your work. And then if you could go to the next slide. Thank you. So why is get out the vote really so important? And it's just as simple as it works. So phone calls by real people can increase turnout by, about 2 to 3%. We at the League of Women Voters have conducted some years of research, and we've shown that we've seen in our, mailings that if we send a mailing to a league and from a league to voters, it can increase turnout by approximately 1%. So that percentage point may seem small, but it can be the difference between, who wins and loses an election. And of course, as a nonpartisan organization, who wins and loses isn't important, but what's important is that we really care that our communities are heard and represented. So, where margins are small, mis, dis, and malinformation campaigns, voter suppression, could have an influence. So it's really essential that people can have and get the information that they need. Get out the vote really also helps leverage our hard work. So if you all are registering and educating your communities, you'll want to make sure that those people actually turn out to vote and they actually make it to be voters. So it helps us, it helps you, leverage the hard work that you've done in really registering and educating to make sure that people actually cast their ballot. It's also something that may be just a quick volunteer opportunity for people to get on, for an hour or two and make phone calls, or for people to, fill out postcards, but it can really have a large impact. And then if you could go to the next slide. Okay, and so as I am wrapping up and as you're developing your plans, something else to consider is just ways to kind of make your community more active in democracy. So considering asking the people that you're registering or educating to make sure that their friends and family are registered and ready to vote, and getting them to make a plan to vote. Also inviting your community to make sure that elections are safe, fair, and efficient by becoming poll workers. Feel free to use our sign up link for Power the Polls. They can easily and quickly sign up to receive more information about how to become a poll worker in their area. You can also consider partnering with a state or local League of Women Voters chapter to host a candidate forum. You may want to create an election observation program or even join our civic listening corps to learn how you can find out what you can do to combat mis, dis, and malinformation. So I will stop there and I will hand it over to Courtney to hand it over to our next presenter.
Thank you so much, Morgan. This is truly incredible information. I've learned a lot of ideas to consider in terms of deepening our work and enhancing our plans. We'll continue to take questions after Eddie wraps up his piece, so I'm going to pass it over to Eddie.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Courtney, for having us. And thank you so much, everyone, for being here today and for your interest in doing voter engagement work. Obviously, it's a really, really big year for it, but I appreciate all the work that you all do year in and year out to be activating your communities, and excited to talk about the civic holidays as a way to do that this year. So my name is Eddie Zerby. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the deputy director here at the Students Learn, Students Vote Coalition. We actually mostly do college campus, like college student voter engagement work, but we also manage a program called National Voter Education Week and civicholidays.org as part of our work. So that's kind of the hat I'm wearing today. But yeah, so I'm mostly going to be talking about the civic holidays. And if you want to go to the next slide, the civic holidays are a bunch of different tentpole activations and nonpartisan days of action that really strengthen and celebrate our country's democracy. Each holiday accounts for a different phase of democratic participation. So you can see registering to vote, making a plan to vote, casting a ballot, and thanking the community members who make elections possible. And each one complements and builds off the other. And together, the civic holidays celebrate the entire voting experience. So obviously, Morgan from the League of Women Voters and League of Women Voters chapters and nationwide, they do a lot of really great work, year-round voter engagement work. But sometimes, especially for those of us who are like a little bit newer to the voter engagement space, the civic holidays could be a really good way to just start getting into this work and access a lot of resources to take your work to the next level. And even just celebrating all of the different holidays can make it really easy to guide your communities through the whole voter engagement process. Make sure that they're registered to vote, they're educated about what's going to be on their ballot and how they're actually going to cast the ballot, and then make sure that they actually turn out to vote during very important elections each and every year. And now we have civicholidays.org, which lets you find everything you need to sign up for and organize all of your different civic holiday celebrations. So each holiday still operates independently, and I'll kind of give an overview on all of them. And we'll communicate with partners directly after you sign up. But I'm going to be uplifting this throughout. Civicholidays.org is a great one-stop shop that'll let you get plugged into all of these holidays and access resources related to all of them. So yeah, I mean, just to kind of make it very, very clear, using that and some links we'll be providing later on actually lets you sign up for all of the holidays at once, and you don't need to fill out any other form after that. So we're trying to make it really easy to celebrate all this. If you want to go to the next slide. So the civic holidays actually, and actually before going in there, or as I start going in to each holiday separately, I'd love to hear from you all, stealing a page, from Morgan's playbook there. If you all can put in chat how many of the civic holidays you've celebrated in the past. So just as a reminder, we had National Voter Registration Day, National Voter Education Week, Vote Early Day, and Election Hero Day. So out of the four, how many of those have you all celebrated in the past to try to get a sense of, okay, so a lot of folks that are newer to the civic holiday space, this is actually super, super helpful to know. But also a lot of folks who have been doing quite a number of them. So let's kick off with probably the most likely that if you've only celebrated one, it's probably National Voter Registration Day. This year, it's going to be celebrated on Tuesday, September 17th, 2024. And it was first observed in 2012. And since then, over 5 million voters have registered to vote on the holiday. And essentially, the thinking behind this holiday is that as many as 1 in 5 eligible Americans are not registered to vote. And so by focusing on one specific day where everybody is, pushing out messaging about the importance of voter registration, reminding people about upcoming deadlines, and ultimately hosting the country's largest single-day voter registration drive, it's almost impossible to not hear about voter registration on that day. And really, that's a lot of the thinking behind all of these holidays. We want to make it very easy. We want to make it very accessible to be able to celebrate these things, join in on these messages, and also make it seem very fun and community oriented. So people see how voting directly relates to what they're doing in everyday life. NVRD, if you want to go to the next slide, has been around for more than a decade now. And like I said, it's really the original civic holiday here. So it's been engaging millions of voters and thousands of partners for more than 10 years. But really following on the success of National Voter Registration Day and facing new and unprecedented challenges during the 2020 presidential election, several organizations came together to kind of replicate that same model, open source, easy, accessible, fun, and focus on and use that same model to focus on other parts of the voter engagement process. So organizations such as, all the many on this call today, can make it very easy to engage their communities through other parts of the voter engagement process, because it doesn't just end as voter registration. Like Morgan was saying, getting people registered to vote is a huge and important part of this, but we need to make sure that we're doing more to ensure that our communities are actually turning out and showing up at the ballot box every year. So the next holiday, if you want to go to the next slide, is National Voter Education Week, which we sometimes call shorthand NVEW, NVEW. And this was really formed in response to many challenges that our partners have raised for years, that many voters, and especially first-time voters, can really overestimate how difficult voting can be, and that ultimately voters just want to feel more confident about what they were voting for. So NVEW is a holiday focused on giving voters the tools and confidence they need to cast their ballot by helping them find their polling location, understand their ballot, and make a plan to vote throughout this week-long campaign. We were first started in 2020, and it always takes place the first full week in October. So this year we're going to celebrate it October 7th through 11th. And choosing that week was intentional. It's meant to complement and work in conjunction with the other holidays. So the placement kind of really lets you continue the momentum from National Voter Registration Day and prepare eligible voters ahead of Vote Early Day and Election Day. Additionally, the time frame really supports the varying deadlines you might see for vote by mail or absentee ballot requests across the country, and gives you all another touch point to further create a strong culture around participation and voting in your communities. So if you want to go to the next slide. So I think, registering to vote is like a no-brainer. You got to get registered to be able to vote. Turning out to vote, vote early day, also very much no-brainer. But I think it's important to take a step back and really emphasize why voter education is so important to voter engagement. Ultimately, it's about removing barriers and increasing access. As y'all know, election processes can be really confusing, especially for new voters. And we also know that there are frequent changes to rules and voting laws that can add to this confusion every year. So in addition to all of these structural barriers, research also shows that there's a number of what our partners at Ideas 42 call psychological barriers that can really hold people back from voting. We don't think that voting should be intimidating or complicated, but we also cannot expect new voters to automatically know how to confidently participate in every election. So we want every potential voter to feel empowered by their role in our democracy. And honestly, as a trusted voice in your community, you can help lead the way by celebrating National Voter Education Week. If you want to go to the next slide. So I won't get too much into details of every single holiday, but I think one thing we like to emphasize from National Voter Education Week is that we have resources around 5 main call to actions. You can choose, if you sign up to celebrate National Voter Education Week this year, you can choose to celebrate however you'd like. Maybe you want to host an event or a table every single day of the week. Maybe you want to send a themed email every single day of the week, or maybe you just have capacity to celebrate 1 or 2 days. That's perfectly fine, but we have resources to help you around these 5 main call to actions that we think really help lower the barriers to participating and voting every single year. So you'll get resources that are related to registering to vote, helping people navigate their ballot and learn what is on it and what they'll be voting on this year. Resources to help people make a plan to vote and understand how to find their polling location, how to vote by mail, stuff like this. Understand the voting process to help build trust in our elections. And so people understand a little bit more about what happens after they actually cast their ballot. And lastly, resources to help people take their engagement to the next level by actually encouraging their friends and family members to get registered with them. If you want to go to the next slide. The next holiday is Vote Early Day, which takes place Tuesday, October 29th of 2024, which is a nonpartisan movement of businesses, nonprofits, election officials, influencers, and tech companies that are all dedicated to making sure all Americans know about and take advantage of their options to vote early. Ultimately, Vote Early Day's goal is to create a culture around the idea that Election Day is the last day to vote, not the only day to vote, and giving voters the tools to cast their ballots early. If you want to go to the next slide. There's a couple of pictures here of how people have celebrated Vote Early Day in the past. I mean, thousands of partners have engaged on this day since 2020 and really helped celebrate our democracy and give people tangible opportunities to cast their ballot on that day. It's really a chance for thousands of our partners to come together to build celebrations that make engaging in our democracy more fun, accessible, and impactful. If you want to go to the next slide. The last civic holiday that you can sign up for on civicholidays.org is Election Hero Day, which is the Monday before Election Day. So this year it's November 4th, 2024. And essentially it's a day that recognizes all the work that went into ensuring a safe, secure, and accessible election day. And for those of us who are like talking to voters, like it serves as one good last reminder to really bring the point home. Tomorrow is your last day to vote this year. Like, please make sure to go vote tomorrow. Here's how you can find your polling location, etc. So there's a couple of different ways to celebrate. This one, there's a lot of online options. There's some in-person support if you all are like really close partners with like your local election office, for example. But again, you'll find resources and ideas on how to celebrate all of these things throughout civicholidays.org and each individual holiday's website. And if you want to go to the next slide, I won't spend too much time going into each holiday or how to actually celebrate. I think Morgan did a great job of like talking through some of the different things and like voter engagement best practices. But I think one thing to emphasize here is that like all of these holidays are open source models. Like there is no wrong way to celebrate this. Whether you want to create some specific materials for social media, or you want to send out email blasts to all of the people that you engage on your email list, or you want to set up a table or host a big event. Like there's a lot of people who will host giant block parties to celebrate, voter registration or vote early day. There's a lot of people who host educational forums where they bring in community partners or local election officials to talk about the voting process during National Voter Education Week. There's no wrong way to celebrate, and it ultimately just depends on your own time, your own capacity, and your experience with this. But again, each holiday is going to offer up a bunch of different resources so that you can get some ideas on how to celebrate and also to make your celebrations as easy and effective as possible. If you want to go to the next slide, again, these are all open source holidays. So no matter what your vision is for how to celebrate, we'll support your vision. There's a bunch of resources to support you. And we really understand that at the end of the day, each community has their own specific needs and their own messaging that's going to work. So what we really try to do is just provide you all with the resources to support your work, make it really easy to engage in these holidays and, make things really fun and engaging for the communities you work with. And ultimately ensure that we're reaching as many voters as possible to make sure they're participating confidently in our elections this year. If you want to go to the next slide. I think just like I said, won't go too much into best practices or anything today. We'll have a couple more months to really plan for this, but some general guidelines and tips that we really like to uplift. Like at the end of the day, you all are going to be really one of the most trusted voices in your community, and nonprofits the last few years have really shown their ability to mobilize voters in big ways. I know Nonprofit Vote was just on here last month talking about their nonprofit power report that really goes into why nonprofits engaging their communities are so effective with voter engagement. But some of the things that we like to uplift, no matter which holiday you're celebrating, make sure to remain nonpartisan and explore collaborations in your community to really reach new audiences and take advantage of the knowledge experts that already exist in this space. So for example, whether you want to team up with a local League of Women Voters chapter, I think I saw in chat folks working with NAACP chapters. We work with a lot of college campuses and they're always really excited to like provide volunteers elsewhere. Like there's a lot of these holidays really give you a lot of flexibility on that, especially in a year where there's a federal election. Like talking about state and local elections makes a huge difference. Like what issues are important to your community and how do the offices that are up for election this year affect those? Can sometimes be a really mobilizing message, especially when, people can be so disconnected from like the day-to-day of like federal offices and what's going on. Especially this already got brought up, with so much mis and disinformation out there. One thing that we definitely like to tell folks is to focus on the facts and not the myths. So especially during like National Voter Education Week, like just focus on like what the facts are, how to actually vote in your community, what happens with the votes, etc. Don't even like talk through don't even mention the myths, right? But I think something that's really at the core of all of our civic holidays, make voting fun, make it approachable, and make it seem like part of your community. Really make sure that you're meeting people where they're at. So setting up, tables where people are passing through and not making people go out of their way to engage with whatever programming or ideas you come up with. And lastly, just look for ways to like really simplify everything, whether if it's like filling out pre-filled out voter registration forms, providing stamps that people can like use to mail in some of their voter registration forms or like mail-in ballot requests. There's a lot that you can do to make this really, really easy for people and make it tough for somebody to say like, no, I just don't have time today, right? And again, every holiday has resources to support. If you want to go to the next slide. I won't go into all of these too in depth. Every holiday has a lot of different resources, and you can expect different trainings throughout the year to also like really help organize all of your different events. I think one thing to just like uplift, the 866 vote hotline is really, really great to give to voters themselves if they're working through any complicated issues. I looked through some of the FAQs that people were asking earlier, and I think I saw a few things about like voting while homeless, or like without a permanent address, which like even if you do not have a permanent address, you still have the ability to register to vote and cast a ballot. And each state is a little bit different in how to do that. So like the 866 vote hotline is a great thing to look at. And I know we have already mentioned some state voter registration guides. Last thing to mention though is that each civic holiday will also offer up a lot of different swag, giveaway, other resources to like really help people visit your events. So make sure to check those out. Yeah, and then the last slide, just join us. I'll put a link in the chat. Like we mentioned, it's easy to sign up for all the civic holidays at once, and we'll make sure to keep in touch throughout the year to continue supporting your events. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, Eddie. I can't emphasize enough how valuable it is to become a Civic Holidays partner and encourage everyone on this call to do so. We've got about 4 minutes left, so let's do some rapid fire questions. We can actually skip the upcoming slides. Maybe we'll stay on for like 2 extra minutes to go through some of the reminders, but let's stick with the questions for now. Super rapid fire. I'm going to combine some. So I've seen a few questions around voting and homelessness, which Eddie just alluded to. We're going to have a webinar entirely on this topic later in the summer. In terms of voter ID specifically for people experiencing homelessness, Vote Riders is a fantastic organization that deals with voter ID challenges and helps people overcome those barriers, no matter how complex they may be. And we'll have a speaker from Vote Riders on in a future webinar. We had a few questions about partnership, I think specifically for Morgan. How do you find local contacts and specifically a request for coming to a chapter meeting to show how to use the voting machines for people with disabilities? Morgan, do you want to take that one?
Sure. So of course, everything looks different, state by state. So if you are interested in kind of connecting with a local LWV chapter, I'll put our website on how you can find where the local League of Women Voters chapter is in your area, so that you can make a partner request and see if they have any resources that may be helpful to your venture. So I hope that answers your question and is helpful. Let me know if not, and I can expand.
Thank you, Morgan. Eddie, I'll direct this question to you. We had a question about provisional voting and challenges. Does any of your voter education work incorporate speaking about provisional voting?
Yeah, actually, the new call to action, one of NVU's call to actions is going to cover topics related to that. But it's a new page that we're putting together because we've gotten a lot of questions about it the last couple of years and want to make sure people feel confident about their ability to cast a ballot, check in on the status of their ballot, and like follow up to make sure their ballot is actually counted this year. So we'll have a lot of information on that on the NVU website.
Great, thank you. We also had a question kind of more generally about building confidence and capacity in communities that may feel hopeless in the face of all of the obstacles. Does anyone want to speak to how you kind of convey that sense of empowerment?
Yeah, so yeah, this is something we're hearing from a lot of our college partners specifically this year. College students, I think the last couple of years, definitely approaching 2024 with a sense of dissatisfaction in like current events and wanting to like really but still wanting to engage, right? So I think in terms of being able to do this, one thing that we're really encouraging people to focus on is some of their local issues. While it's great that we're going to get so much attention on elections this year because of the federal ticket and the federal race. At the end of the day, like we all know that a lot of the issues that really are going to affect people the most are things that happen at the local level. And a lot of those races are still going to be on the ballot this year. So I think focusing on those issues, as well as some of the victories that your community may have seen over the last couple of years, and some of the work that your organization is doing to like really try to advocate for your community and your city, I think really shows like how much work we've put in over the last couple of years, and doesn't necessarily just view 2024 as like a race between two people, but like a continuation of like momentum that has been building for years, if not decades, right? So I think that that's one thing that we're really trying to like grapple with and like talk to with partners about.
Absolutely. Kind of a related question for Morgan about the impact of legislation. Could you talk a bit about like the relationship between voter engagement efforts targeting high opportunity voters and like post-election outcomes and kind of how you engage people on that?
Sure, of course, we, have a legislation department that may, be better equipped to answer, how legislation is impacting voters and kind of what that looks like aftermath. But I think it's definitely important that, pro voter, um, you know, um, legislation that can help, everybody be able to access the vote. So yeah, so I think of course it depends and um, it's important. And I know, for example, I think a couple of years ago in Arizona where there was some kind of intimidation at drop boxes and how our organization and other partner organizations kind of got to that quickly and were able to kind of stop that threat and have people be able to access their drop boxes safely. So definitely legislation does have an important impact in making voting accessible.
Absolutely. And I know at NLIHC, we really emphasize that we're building the political power of low income renters so that we can hold elected officials accountable to prioritizing housing justice and really kind of shift that political calculus. We are 2 minutes over time, so I know a lot of people may have to go. I think if people can if anyone who's available to stick around for another 2 minutes, I'm just gonna really quickly run through opportunities to stay involved beyond this webinar. If you were on last week, some of this information will be a repeat, so feel free to hop off. But if this is your first time, you might want to stick around just to have the plugs of these opportunities. So we can go to the next slide. We have an Our Homes, Our Votes affiliates network. This is open to all nonpartisan organizations that share the goals of the campaign. We have an email listserv. We'll have regular office hours. We provide enhanced access to our Homes, Our Votes tools and resources. We just dropped the link where you can sign up if your organization is interested and hasn't signed up already. We can go to the next slide. We also have a Housing Providers Council. We actually got one question in the Q&A about this that I responded to directly. But if you are with an affordable housing developer, property manager, or resident services staff, this is a great opportunity to have a deeper dive and some trainings that are more specific to those groups on doing nonpartisan voter engagement. And we just dropped that sign up link in the chat. Next slide. We also have an online voter registration and information platform. This is a one-stop shop where you can register to vote and update your voter registration, check your voter registration status, and sign up for election reminders. So I'll be doing more of a walkthrough of this tool in our next webinar. But if you are looking to register or anything like that, check out that link. Next slide. We can actually skip over this one because Eddie did a deep dive on the civic holidays, and we'll have more specifics on National Voter Registration Day in our next webinar, which is Voter Registration 101 on Monday, May 20th. We'll have Cheyenne Sapp, who's the campaign director of National Voter Registration Day, again, going a little bit deeper on some of the activities that Eddie discussed, but with reference to voter registration specifically. We'll have Andrew West from Colorado Coalition for the Homeless speaking about best practices in voter registration initiatives and actually speaking to a lot of the questions that we had about voters experiencing homelessness. So please attend next time if you have deeper questions there. And then, as I just said, I'll do more of an exploration of TurboVote. I think that brings us to the end, I'm pretty sure. Oh yes, here's a little snapshot of the full webinar series, which is also posted on our website. I think that brings us to the end. Thank you everyone for sticking around for another few minutes. Thank you to our incredible, incredible panelists for such a wealth of information. And we will be sending out all of this information in the chat, our Friday email newsletter and posting it all on the Our Homes, Our Votes website. Thank you all so, so much.